I'm Sophia, 34, female, and my husband just asked me if I was going to cry after I found proof of his affair. He had no idea I'd already hired the divorce lawyer he was secretly meeting. The cold little slip of paper felt like ice in my hand, a stark white rectangle of betrayal that had fallen out of his travel bag. It was a hotel receipt. Not from a work trip I knew about, but from a five-star hotel in our very own city, dated for a night he was supposedly working late. The name on the bill was his, Mark. For 10 years, I had built my life around him, with him. I was an architect, a creator of structures meant to last, and I had foolishly believed my marriage was the strongest structure of all. We were a team, or so I thought. We had met in college, a whirlwind romance of late-night study sessions and shared dreams whispered in the dark. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who could command a room with a single smile. I was quieter, more observant, finding beauty in lines and angles, in the quiet stability of things built with care. We seemed to balance each other perfectly. But over the years, the balance had shifted so subtly I barely noticed it. His confidence had morphed into a kind of casual condescension. My quiet nature was no longer seen as a strength, but as a weakness he could poke at with a veneer of humor. Our life became a stage for his performance, and I was just part of the set dressing. I remember the launch party for my first major project, a community library I had poured my soul into for 2 years. I was buzzing with pride and nervous energy, standing beside a scale model of the building. Mark was mingling, a glass of champagne in hand, charming my colleagues and my boss. I overheard a group of them asking him if he was proud of me. He laughed, a loud, theatrical sound. "Of course I am," he said, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "She's great with her little blueprints and models. It's adorable, keeps her busy while I'm out there in the real world, closing the big deals." He winked at them. They smiled politely, but I saw the flicker of awkwardness in their eyes. In that moment, in front of everyone who respected my work, he had reduced my career to a childish hobby. I felt myself shrink, the vibrant joy of the evening dimming to a dull ache. When I tried to talk to him about it later, he just rolled his eyes. "Oh, relax, Soph. It was a joke. Can't you take a joke?" Then there was the time with his family at Christmas. His mother had a habit of making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my decorating, my very presence in her son's life. That year, she'd criticized the tablecloth I'd chosen, saying it was a bit bold for a formal dinner. I tried to laugh it off, but the comments stung. Later, when we were alone, I told Mark that his mother's remarks sometimes hurt my feelings. I wasn't asking him to fight with her, only for a little validation, a little support. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "You're just too sensitive," he said, not unkindly, but with a finality that shut down the conversation. "That's just how she is. You need to learn to not let it get to you." He wasn't my partner, standing with me against the world. He was a moderator, telling me how I should feel, instructing me to be tougher, to be less like myself. The worst was when my father passed away. It was a sudden, gut-wrenching loss. I was a wreck, barely able to function. Mark was present. He handled the logistical things, the phone calls and arrangements with an air of detached efficiency. But when I would break down in tears, when I needed him to just hold me and let me grieve, he would grow stiff and uncomfortable. One evening, I was crying on the sofa, and he patted my back awkwardly. "Come on, Soph," he said, his voice laced with impatience. "It's been a week. You have to pull yourself together. Crying isn't going to bring him back." He said it as if he were offering practical advice, as if my grief were an inconvenience, a problem to be solved rather than a process to be endured. That was the moment I first felt a true, deep crack in our foundation. I realized he wasn't capable of meeting my emotional needs because he didn't even see them as valid. So when I stood in our bedroom, the hotel receipt clutched in my hand, a part of me wasn't even surprised. It was just the final, undeniable proof that the man I married didn't respect me, didn't value me, and certainly didn't love me. The only thing I didn't know yet was the true depth of the deception. I thought it was just a simple, sordid affair. I had no idea the truth was far more calculated and far more cruel. The 2 weeks leading up to the discovery were a masterclass in subtle manipulation. It all started with the announcement of his urgent business trip. Mark was a sales director for a large tech firm, so last-minute travel wasn't entirely out of the ordinary. But this time, something felt off. Big new client in the city, he'd said, not looking up from his laptop as he sat at the kitchen island. The head office wants me to go and seal the deal personally. It's a huge opportunity. In the city, I asked, pausing from sketching a design at the dining table. You mean you'll be staying overnight here, in our own city? He finally looked up, his expression a carefully crafted mask of professionalism. Yeah, it's a whole conference thing. They're putting us all up at the Viceroy. Team building, schmoozing, the whole 9 yards. It's easier than commuting back and forth, you know? Early mornings, late nights. It sounded plausible, just plausible enough to make me feel foolish for questioning it. The Viceroy was one of those ridiculously expensive boutique hotels downtown, the kind reserved for tourists with money to burn or high-flying executives. It made sense on paper, but a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Why couldn't he just take a taxi home? We lived less than 30 minutes from the downtown core. For the next few days, he was a whirlwind of manufactured importance. He took hushed phone calls in his home office, closing the door firmly behind him. His phone, which used to lie casually on the counter, was now perpetually in his pocket or face down beside him. Once, I walked in on him while he was texting, and he flinched, quickly pocketing the device with a speed that was almost comical. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly, pretending I hadn't noticed. Yeah, just work stuff," he'd mumbled. "This client is very demanding." The distance between us grew. It was a quiet, insidious thing. We'd sit on the same couch in the evening, the television flickering in front of us, but he was a million miles away. His laughter was hollow, his questions about my day were perfunctory. He was a ghost in our own home, going through the motions. I felt like I was living with a stranger, and the silence in our house became heavy with unspoken words. I started to feel a creeping anxiety, a sense that I was losing my grip on reality. Was I being paranoid? Was the stress of my own work making me imagine things? I told myself that marriage had its lulls, its periods of distance. I tried to convince myself that this was just a phase, that once this big deal was closed, he would come back to me. The night of his supposed conference arrived. He packed an overnight bag with a crisp suit and a fresh shirt. He kissed me goodbye at the door, a quick, dry peck on the cheek that felt more like a formality than an act of affection. "I'll probably be out late with the clients," he said. "Don't wait up." "Okay, good luck," I said, my voice sounding small and thin. That night, the house felt enormous and empty. I couldn't focus on my work. I wandered from room to room, the silence pressing in on me. I tried calling him around 10 p.m. just to wish him good night. The phone rang and rang before clicking to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Mark. Leave a message." I didn't. A cold dread washed over me. He always answered my calls, even if it was just to say he was busy and would call me back. The next day, he came home in the late afternoon, looking tired but triumphant. "Nailed it," he announced, dropping his bag by the door. "The deal is done. We're celebrating tonight." He was overly cheerful, almost manic. He suggested we go to our favorite Italian restaurant, the one where he'd proposed. It felt like a performance, a grand gesture designed to distract me, to reassure me that everything was fine. I went along with it, playing the part of the supportive wife, but the unease was a constant, thrumming presence beneath the surface. A few days later, he was getting ready for the gym. He'd already tossed his travel bag into the back of our walk-in closet. I was looking for a missing earring, one of a pair my father had given me, and I thought it might have fallen near the closet floor. As I knelt, my hand brushed against the side pocket of his bag. He hadn't zipped it up completely. My fingers felt a piece of paper inside. Curiosity got the better of me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled it out. It wasn't a work document. It was a hotel receipt. My eyes scanned the details, and the blood drained from my face. It was from the Viceroy, yes, but the check-in and check-out dates were for 2 nights, not 1. And it was for a king suite with city view. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the receipt, under the room charges, was a line item from the hotel's exclusive restaurant. Table for two, anniversary package. Anniversary package. My mind spun, trying to make sense of it. His business trip, the conference, the team building, it was all a lie. He hadn't been schmoozing clients. He had been there with someone else, having a romantic dinner, staying in a suite for 2 nights. The fake cheerfulness, the celebratory dinner he'd taken me to, it was all a cover. A guilty, elaborate perfer. Man's to throw me off the scent. I sank back on my heels, the receipt trembling in my hand. The quiet suspicion I'd been trying to suppress for weeks erupted into a roaring, undeniable certainty. The foundation of my world had just crumbled to dust. And in that moment, sitting on the floor of our closet, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I waited for him to get back from the gym. I didn't cry. I didn't rage or throw things. A strange, chilling calm had settled over me. The shock was so profound that it had bypassed all the usual emotional channels and landed as a cold, hard stone in the pit of my stomach. I sat on the edge of our bed, the receipt placed neatly on the duvet beside me, and I waited. He came in an hour later, flushed from his workout, humming to himself. He tossed his gym bag on the floor and started unlacing his sneakers, oblivious. "Hey," he said cheerfully. "What are you up to? I was thinking we could order in tonight, Thai food." I didn't answer, I just watched him. The silence finally registered, and he looked up, his smile faltering as he saw my expression. His eyes darted to the bed, to the white slip of paper sitting there like an accusation. He froze. "What's that?" he asked, but his voice was tight. He knew exactly what it was. "You tell me, Mark," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "It fell out of your travel bag. I was just wondering about the anniversary package for two. Must have been a very important client." He straightened up, his face hardening. The friendly, charming mask he wore for the world dissolved, and for the first time, I saw the cold, hard man underneath. First came the denial, weak and pathetic. "I don't know what that is," he said, shaking his head. "The hotel must have made a mistake. You know how they are, always trying to upsell you on things." "A mistake?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "They made a mistake and charged you for a 2-night stay when you were only there for 1? They made a mistake and put a romantic dinner for 2 on your bill. Who were you celebrating an anniversary with, Mark?" He stared at me, his jaw clenching. He knew he was caught. There was no plausible explanation, no lie big enough to cover this. And in that moment, seeing he had no way out, he chose not to be remorseful or apologetic. He chose to be cruel. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. It was the most chilling expression I had ever seen. It was a look of pure contempt. He walked over, picked up the receipt, and glanced at it as if it were nothing more than a mild annoyance. "All right, fine," he said, tossing it back onto the bed. "So what are you going to do about it?" I was stunned into silence. I had expected denials, excuses, maybe even frantic apologies. I had not expected this open, shameless defiance. I had not expected him to look at me as if I were something pathetic he had scraped off his shoe. "What am I going to do about it?" I repeated, my voice trembling slightly now. "Mark, we've been married for 10 years. We built a life together. How could you do this?" My composure was finally cracking, and I felt the hot sting of tears welling in my eyes. This was it, the heartbreak, the raw, agonizing pain of betrayal hitting me full force. And that's when he delivered the line that would echo in my mind forever. He leaned forward, his face just inches from mine, and his voice was a soft, mocking purr. "Aw," he cooed, the smirk never leaving his face. "Is the little girl gonna cry?" The world stopped. The air left my lungs. He wasn't just admitting his betrayal, he was mocking my pain. He was taking my heartbreak and using it as a weapon against me, trying to make me feel small, weak, and hysterical. It was the same condescending tone he'd used when talking about my little blueprints, the same dismissiveness he'd shown when I was grieving my father. This was the real him. This cruel, callous stranger was the man I had shared my life with. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. The tears that had been threatening to fall receded, replaced by a wave of icy clarity. The hurt was still there, a massive, gaping wound in my chest, but another feeling rose to meet it: rage. Cold, clear, and absolute. I stood up, and the difference in our heights felt negligible for the first time. I looked him straight in the eye, and the power dynamic that he had so carefully cultivated for years suddenly evaporated. He had expected me to shatter. He was waiting for the sobs, the pleading. He wanted me to fall apart so he could stand over me, victorious. I gave him none of it. "No," I said, my voice low and devoid of all emotion. "I'm not going to cry." I held his gaze for a long moment, letting him see that the woman he thought he knew was gone. Then I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving him standing there with his ugly smirk and the truth of what he'd done lying between us. As I walked down the hall, I said one more thing over my shoulder, a simple, final statement that sealed our fate. "I'm done." I didn't know the full story yet, but I knew enough. The love was gone, destroyed by years of quiet cuts, and now this final, brutal blow. The marriage was over. He thought he had all the power, that my tears were his victory. He had no idea that my real response wouldn't be tears, but action. He had no idea that his plan was already unraveling. After leaving the bedroom, I didn't stop. I walked straight out the front door, got into my car, and just drove. I had no destination in mind. I just needed air, space, distance from the man with the condescending smirk and the ruins of our marriage. The cold calm that had enveloped me during the confrontation began to fray at the edges, and the pain came rushing in. It was a physical thing, an ache so deep it felt like my bones were dissolving. For 10 years, my life had been us. Now there was only me, and I had no idea who that person was anymore. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, a place with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of stale coffee. I ordered a black coffee I didn't drink and just sat there, replaying the scene in my head. His words, "Is the little girl gonna cry?" echoed on a loop. It was the ultimate disrespect, the final proof that he saw me as a child, an emotional subordinate whose feelings were a source of amusement. But as I sat there, the shock and hurt began to curdle into something else, a burning, relentless curiosity. The anniversary package was the detail that didn't fit. An affair is one thing, a messy, impulsive, selfish act. But celebrating an anniversary, that implied something more established, something with history. Who was she? How long had this been going on? The next day, I went back to the house while Mark was at work. I felt like a thief in my own home, my hands shaking as I went straight to his home office. I had never invaded his privacy before. Our trust, I'd believed, was sacred. Now that trust was a joke, and I felt no guilt as I turned on his computer. I knew his password. It was the name of his college mascot, a testament to how little he'd changed. I started with his emails. I scrolled through work messages, spam, and newsletters, my heart pounding with every click. At first, there was nothing. He was clever enough to have deleted anything incriminating from his main inbox. But then I remembered the archive folder, a place people often moved things to forget about them. I clicked it open, and there it was. It wasn't a thread of romantic emails to another woman. It was something far worse, something so calculated it took my breath away. It was a chain of emails with a law firm, Sharma and Associates, Family Law. The subject line was confidential consultation. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was planning to leave me. My fingers trembled as I opened the first email. It was from Mark, dated 6 weeks ago, requesting a preliminary consultation with their top lawyer, a Ms. Anya Sharma. He wrote that he was seeking advice on asset division in a high-net-worth divorce. He was positioning himself, getting his ducks in a row, preparing to blindside me completely. The final email in the chain was a confirmation. "Dear Mr. Davies," it read, "this confirms your in-person consultation with Ms. Sharma on Tuesday, the 15th, at 2:00 p.m. at our downtown offices. Please find attached our initial intake form. We look forward to meeting with you." Tuesday, the 15th. That was the first day of his supposed business trip. The Viceroy Hotel was only 3 blocks from the law firm's address. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. There was no other woman, or if there was, she was incidental. The anniversary package wasn't for a mistress. It was for him. A sick, solitary celebration of the anniversary of his decision to leave me. He had been celebrating his impending freedom while I was at home, worried about his big work deal. The business trip was a lie to cover his meeting with a divorce lawyer. He was planning to serve me with papers, armed with the best legal advice money could buy, while I was still completely in the dark. His cruelty during our confrontation made sense now. He wasn't just being defensive, he was being strategic. He wanted me to break down, to become the emotional, hysterical wife. It would have made him look like the rational, stable one, the victim of an unstable spouse, which would have only helped his case. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated attack on our shared life. He had been moving assets, hiding funds, and planning his exit strategy, all while pretending to be my loving husband. The man I had married had systematically and secretly been plotting the demolition of our entire world. I stood up from his desk and walked numbly through the house we had designed together. I had icked the paint colors, the flooring, the light fixtures. My architectural drawings for the renovation were still pinned to a corkboard in the kitchen. Every corner of this house held a memory, and now every single one of them felt tainted, fraudulent. The grief was still there, a monstrous weight on my chest. But now it had a new companion, a cold, hard fury. He thought I was a weak, sensitive little girl who would just cry and fall apart. He had underestimated me for the last time. He had meticulously planned his war, believing I would be a passive casualty. He had no idea I was about to find a new architect to design my victory. And her name was Anya Sharma. The next morning, I woke up with a singular purpose. The fog of grief and shock had lifted, replaced by the sharp, invigorating clarity of resolve. Mark had left for work early, leaving a note on the counter. "We need to talk. I'll be home at 7. He was ready to dictate the terms of our surrender. He had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire script. I looked up Sharma and Associates online. Their website was sleek, professional, and intimidating. Ms. Anya Sharma's profile was front and center. The photo showed a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her biography was a laundry list of accolades: top litigator of the year, master of complex asset division, fiercely dedicated to her client's success. She was, by all accounts, a shark, the best shark in the city. And Mark had tried to hire her to swim against me. A bold, audacious idea began to form in my mind. It was a gamble, a long shot, but the thought of it sent a thrill of empowerment through me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Sharma and Associates. My voice was surprisingly steady when the receptionist answered. "Hello," I said. "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Anya Sharma. It's regarding a new divorce case." The receptionist put me on a brief hold. I half expected her to come back and say that Ms. Sharma was unavailable or that there was a conflict of interest. My heart pounded in my chest, but when she returned, her tone was professional and accommodating. "Ms. Sharma has an unexpected opening this afternoon at 3:00 p.m. Would that work for you?" "Yes," I said, my voice catching slightly. "Yes, that's perfect." I spent the next few hours preparing. I gathered all our financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, and my own business records. I was an architect with a successful independent practice, a fact Mark had always minimized, but which was now my greatest asset. I put everything into a neat portfolio. I dressed in one of my most professional outfits, a tailored blazer and smart trousers. I wanted to walk into that office not as a crying, heartbroken wife, but as a prospective client who was serious, organized, and ready for a fight. When I arrived at the law firm's downtown office, it was exactly as I'd imagined: modern, minimalist, and radiating an aura of quiet, expensive power. I announced myself to the receptionist, and a few minutes later, I was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline. Ms. Anya Sharma stood up from behind a large mahogany desk to greet me. In person, She was even more formidable than her photo suggested. She was immaculately dressed, and her handshake was firm. "Ms. Davies," she said, her voice crisp, "please have a seat. What can I do for you?" I sat down, placed my portfolio on her desk, and took a deep breath. "My name is Sophia Davies. My husband is Mark Davies. I believe he had a consultation with you last week." I watched her face carefully for any reaction. There was none. Her expression remained perfectly neutral, a mask of professionalism. "Client consultations are confidential, Ms. Davies," she said smoothly. "I can neither confirm nor deny any past or present associations." "I understand," I said, "but I know he was here, and I know he was planning to divorce me. I found out 2 days ago, and when I confronted him, he was cruel. He was counting on me to be emotional and unprepared." I opened my portfolio and pushed it across the desk towards her. "These are our financials, or at least what I know of them. We own our home, we have a joint investment account, and he has a significant stock package from his company. I have my own architecture firm, which is registered as a sole proprietorship. I am here today because I don't want to be a victim in this process. I want to be proactive. I want to retain you." I held my breath. This was the moment of truth. Would she refuse? Would the fact that Mark had consulted her first create a conflict that prevented her from representing me? Ms. Sharma was silent for a long moment. She steepled her fingers and studied me with those piercing eyes. She wasn't looking at me with pity, but with a sharp, analytical gaze. She was assessing me, sizing me up. Finally, E spoke. "A preliminary consultation does not establish a formal attorney-client relationship. No retainer was signed. Therefore, there is no legal conflict of interest that would preclude me from representing you." A wave of relief so powerful, it almost made me dizzy washed over me. She continued, her voice all business. "However, I need to be very clear. If you retain me, I will be your advocate and yours alone. My loyalty will be to you and to securing the most favorable outcome for you under the law. This will be a difficult process. Are you prepared for that?" I looked her straight in the eye, the image of Mark's smirking face flashing in my mind. "I'm more prepared than you can imagine," I said. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a document. "This is my firm's retainer agreement. Read it carefully. If you agree to the terms, sign it, and my firm will begin work on your case immediately. We will file the petition for dissolution of marriage on your behalf first thing tomorrow morning. We will control the narrative from the very beginning." My hand was steady as I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. As my signature dried on the page, I felt a fundamental shift in my own architecture. The crumbling structure of my old life was being cleared away, and on that empty ground, I was laying the foundation for something new, something stronger. Mark had chosen the best lawyer in the city to use as a weapon against me. He just never imagined that I would be the one to pull the trigger. I went home. The note was still on the counter, a passive-aggressive summons. I threw it in the trash. I spent the rest of the evening in my home studio, organizing my project files, creating a sense of order in the one part of my life I still fully controlled. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. I was no longer a participant in the drama. I was the director, preparing for the final scene. Mark came home precisely at 7, his briefcase in hand, his expression a carefully rehearsed mask of solemnity. He was ready to play the part of the reluctant, reasonable husband forced to make a difficult decision. "Sophia," he began, his voice grave, "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about the future." "Yes, we do," I said, meeting his gaze from across the kitchen island. I didn't get up. I remained seated, calm and centered. My lack of visible distress clearly unsettled him. He was expecting to find me red-eyed and pleading. "Look," he said, sighing dramatically as he loosened his tie. "I know you're hurt. I never wanted to hurt you." It was a classic line, designed to absolve him of all responsibility. "But things haven't been right between us for a long time. You have to admit that. We've grown apart." "Is that what you were celebrating at the Viceroy?" I asked, my voice flat, growing apart. He flinched, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. This isn't about that, Sophia. This is about being realistic. The marriage isn't working. I think it's best if we separate. We can do this amicably, without lawyers and fighting. We can just divide things fairly and move on. This was his play. To convince me to agree to a quiet, quick separation where he, with the secret advice of a top-tier lawyer, would dictate what fair meant. He would have convinced me to sign away my rights to assets I didn't even know existed. I almost smiled. "No, I don't think so," I said softly. He frowned. "What do you mean, no? Be reasonable." "I mean, no, we won't be doing this without lawyers," I said, standing up and walking around the island to face him. "I agree that the marriage is over. In fact, I've already taken some steps to formalize the process." A look of confusion, mixed with alarm, dawned on his face. "What are you talking about? What steps?" "I've retained a lawyer," I said simply. Mark actually laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound. "A lawyer? Soph, you don't need to do that. You'll just waste money. Let's be adults about this." "I am being an adult, Mark. I'm protecting my interests. Something you taught me was very important," I said, the barb landing exactly as I intended. "I've hired the best. I wanted to make sure I was properly represented." He was still smirking, but his eyes were wary now. He was losing control of the conversation, and he didn't like it. "The best? And who exactly would that be?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension, as if he were humoring a child. I held his gaze and let the name hang in the air for a moment before I delivered it. "Ms. Anya Sharma." The transformation was instantaneous and astonishing. The smirk on his face didn't just disappear, it collapsed. His skin went pale, a sickly, grayish color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked as if I had physically struck him. "What did you say?" he finally stammered, his voice. "Ice a hoarse whisper." "I retained Anya Sharma this afternoon," I repeated, my voice clear and unwavering. "She'll be filing the petition on my behalf tomorrow morning. She sends her regards, by the way, said she was looking forward to a productive working relationship." He stared at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to process the impossibility of what I was telling him. "You can't," he said, shaking his head in frantic denial. "You can't. There's a conflict of interest. She consulted with me first. She can't represent you." "Actually, she can," I said, channeling the cool confidence of Ms. Sharma herself. "A preliminary consultation doesn't create a formal conflict. You never signed a retainer, Mark. You were just testing the waters. I, on the other hand, signed everything. She works for me now." The full weight of his miscalculation crashed down on him. The brilliant, ruthless lawyer he had chosen to dismantle my life was now going to be my champion. All his secret planning, his deception, his strategy, it had all been for nothing. Worse, he had armed his opponent with his weapon of choice. He was utterly, completely outmaneuvered. And that's when it happened. The tough, condescending man who had mocked my pain, who had asked if the little girl was gonna cry, crumpled. His face, a mask of shock and panic, began to contort. His eyes filled with tears, not of remorse or heartbreak, but of pure, unadulterated rage and defeat. He sank onto one of the kitchen chairs, put his head in his hands, and a choked, guttural sob escaped his lips. He was crying because he had lost. He was crying because the power he so desperately craved had been stripped from him. I stood there and watched him, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, not even anger anymore. Just a profound, quiet emptiness. The man I had once loved was gone, and this weeping stranger at my kitchen table was all that was left. The smirk was gone, and so was my husband. I turned around and walked back to my studio, closing the door softly behind me. The divorce was exactly as Ms. Sharma had predicted. Difficult, but efficient. Mark, stripped of his chosen legal counsel, was forced to hire a different, less effective lawyer who was immediately outmatched. His attempts to hide assets were quickly uncovered by the forensic accountants Ms. Sharma's firm employed. His narrative of being the long-suffering husband to an overly emotional wife fell completely flat against my calm, documented, and professional demeanor. Ms. Sharma was a force of nature in depositions, dismantling Mark's arguments with surgical precision. Throughout the process, I focused on what I could build, not what had been destroyed. I poured my energy into my work. I took on a challenging new project, designing a sustainable living complex that pushed the boundaries of my creativity. The long hours were a welcome distraction, and the act of creating something beautiful and lasting from scratch was deeply therapeutic. I was building a new future, one blueprint at a time. The house we had shared was sold, and the proceeds were divided according to the settlement Ms. Sharma secured for me, a settlement that was far more favorable than anything Mark had envisioned in his secret plans. The day I moved into my new apartment was a milestone. It was smaller than the house, but it was all mine. It was a clean slate, a blank canvas overlooking the city. As I unpacked my books and my drafting tools, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing for years. I started reconnecting with friends I had drifted from, people who had been quietly pushed to the periphery by Mark's all-encompassing ego. I had brunch on Sundays, went to art galleries, and took long walks by the river. I was rediscovering the simple joys of my own company, learning to listen to my own voice again without the constant filter of his judgment. I saw Mark one last time when we met to sign the final divorce papers. He looked diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by a weary bitterness. He didn't look at me. He just signed the documents with a grim set to his mouth and left without a word. There was no final, dramatic confrontation. There was nothing left to say. Our story was over, the last page turned. My new life is quieter, but it is authentically mine. I am no longer set dressing in someone else's performance. I am the architect of my own existence. Some days, the ghost of the betrayal lingers, a faint scar that reminds me of the pain. But it no longer defines me. It is simply a part of the history of the structure, a foundational flaw that was discovered and repaired, making the new building stronger than the old one ever was. He asked me if I was going to cry, and in the end, I didn't. I built something instead. So, what do you think? Was I right to hire his own lawyer against him, or should I have taken a different path? I read all the comments, and I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this.